Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. Continuing on with this year's Booker 2022 long list, I am now going to be talking about Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. And I'm really excited to see this on the list. It was one of those things, I knew that it was technically eligible, but part of me thought because, I'd kind of almost mentally filed it away as sort of being a book of last year. It was one of my top books of last year. I had read it right near the end of the year. It has a very wintry feeling to it. And so I think I kind of just mentally associated it with back then. And actually, it's so nice to see this book getting a kind of bit of second wind. I mean, I say that, it came out right at the end of last year. So I suppose this is a big year for the book regardless. But and it was on the Rathbones Folio shortlist as well. But I just think this is really quite a special book and just really wanted to have a chance to speak about it. So I'm going to be talking about it and there will be some slight spoilers, but I will tell you before I get to that point as well, so you've got a chance to click away. Anyway, let's get on with the book. Now, as I mentioned, it was one of my books of last year. I've also sort of spoken about the Rathbones Folio Prize. So I have gone into a bit of detail about this book elsewhere as well. But I realised actually I didn't do a solo review of it at the time. And I do kind of want to talk about that a bit now, particularly as it's had its long listing. And I think it's just a book that's worth celebrating. So just to kind of start off in terms of the almost like bringing out some of the obvious points about this book. It is very short. It's been sort of noted already that it's the shortest, the shortest book ever long listed for the Booker, which actually also surprises me because I was fully convinced that the copy I had of The Testament of Mary by Conte Bean was like 100 pages, but regardless, this is a very short book. And I think there's a lot that's worth saying about different people's reactions to the size of the book, because I think for some people they do feel that this book kind of fits more into the sort of novella territory or a long short story is how I've heard some people talk about it, and also that some people felt this book didn't do enough, that it kind of didn't go far enough into the themes. I think there's a lot of valid things to be said around that, and I don't disagree that it sort of purposely cuts things short. But actually, I think the real beauty of this book is in that kind of silence. I think the book, had it shown everything that it sort of starts to talk about, would have felt very different. And actually, the author herself has said this story is not about the Magdalene laundries. It's a story about a man and his relationships. And I thought that was really interesting because the author's note at the end of this book sort of reveals a lot about the kind of context of this book, which is around the Magdalene laundries, which were essentially, I'm no expert on this, but a large part of what it sort of was around was that often if women, particularly poorer women, weren't able to look after their children, particularly because of, for financial reasons, they were given often to nuns to look after. And the sort of process within that would then also be that these mothers would then go and work at laundries and sort of essentially pay for their childcare that way. However, sort of particularly in recent years, sort of a lot's been coming out that these were not as, there was a lot more happening in these places than met the eye, that actually there was, a lot of either misappropriation of funds, or that there was sort of mistreatment of either the children or of the people working. So there's a lot kind of to unpick behind that. There's a whole other story. So I think it's actually quite interesting at the heart of this book that we never really get an insight into that fully. We're instead very much on the outskirts with this book. And what we then learn instead is almost, as the author was sort of mentioning, this idea of it's actually just a story about a man, a woman, and about some of their relationships with other people around them and with the society around them. And with that, I'm going to start talking a bit more about what the book itself is about. So, as mentioned, we're focused on a sort of central man. And what I think is really interesting about him is he, in many ways, is oblivious to a lot of what's going on, as many people were, not only just in this book, but actually that sort of bears out sort of historically that apparently many people did not know what was going on inside these laundries that were, right next door to them in many cases. So we get this story of a sort of man who reaches out to sort of look after this woman who he sees as in, you know, in a bad way around this time, particularly around the winter leading up to Christmas. So not only a sense of sort of the idea of charity, of kind of looking after her, but also he sees a sort of moral duty to make sure that she's okay. And I get this is also a point where people have some criticisms of the book, around the sort of the way that that sort of accidentally positions him as a sort of male savior, sort of swooping in and getting all the props for doing all the nice things that which he should just be doing as a decent member of society. And I get that to some degree, but I will also say I thought that there was something really quite beautiful about the way it was picked up, because obviously, you know, given that we're dealing with nuns, there's a lot of religious there are a lot of religious overtones to a lot of things that are happening within society. And for me, what I think I found most profound about this book was the way that for a society that was sort of preaching charity beginning at home and being, you know, good Christians with a capital C, of, you know, really looking after each other and, you know, sort of following the word of the Bible or what have you, to love thy neighbor and to look after everybody around you. What we then see is this woman who's outcast for sort of essentially falling on hard times, and how he's one of the sort of few people who seems to really follow through in those values, that actually he's doing that to support this woman, but the people who are actual nuns, whose role it is, you know, to kind of uphold these values, and, you know, who are sort of even more connected with religion than the society around them, those people don't seem to be following those same values. So I think this book sort of subtly exposes that that kind of political point at the heart of things, that actually there is a difference between, you know, being a Christian with a capital C and Christian behaviors with a sort of lowercase c, of what do you do to love thy neighbor or to look after people around you. And I think the book, as we go, sort of slowly starts to lift this fog that we sort of almost start off with not really knowing anything, and particularly with such a short book, much is kept from us during the text. We don't really often get a lot of things revealed directly to us, but slowly, kind of behind the scenes, Claire Keegan starts removing things and taking them away. And as she takes them away, we start to see increasingly what's actually happening in the society around us. And we never get the full reveal of exactly what that looks like, but we get enough taken away that we can start to see where things are going. And it feels all the more heartbreaking for that, I think, as a result. Is there's something so beautiful about the author letting you in slowly, bit by bit, and that's to say nothing of how well written this is. For me, at least, I thought the prose was so deceptively simple, as in it reads at first like a fairly standard sort of fable or kind of tale like that, but actually there's so much that's going on behind the scenes, because the language is this sort of amorphous thing that allows us to both hide and to see things at various points during the book. And I really just love how that all threaded together. I thought it was deeply effective, and really quite powerful. And it's almost frustrating how much she's able to do in 100 pages, because I've definitely read 100 pages of some other novels that could learn a lot from this in terms of how to kind of tell bits of the story within this. And with that, I'm going to go into some slight spoilers as well. So to go into some of the spoilers, I mentioned that Claire Keegan slowly reveals things as we go. The things that are revealed are a few more notes sort of around the difficulties of what's going on within the time, all of the sort of the machinations within the church, within sort of society, within various other bits. But slowly, as that's lifted as well, we also get the sense of something quite futile happening. This is not potentially going to be a nice, happy, cozy ending, because actually the laundries and the system that supports them are more powerful than this one man sort of providing individual support to this one woman can achieve. And so we know in some ways that it's fated to be that way as we're going through the book, and that makes the ending even more sort of crushing in some ways, that regardless of what other happy things might happen, this still exists. And the author's note feels particularly crushing here, to kind of finish a book and then have the author's note be like, yep, actually, so this was a real thing and it carried on for a very long time and there are still investigations being done into it. And it's so interesting to see how we get to this point within the book. I think it's a really, really beautiful and really touching book. I do see that for some people the ending feels a bit hollow, in that we sort of just suddenly leave the story, it's over, it's done, what do we know about what's happened next? But actually I think that's the point, is we don't always know. The characters in the story, they don't know what's happening in their own town quite a lot of the time, and there's a lot that's then brought up around this hypocrisy of the church, or particularly the sort of various people within the church, to sort of preach certain things, but actually we leave this woman with basically between a rock and a hard place, in in the cold, in the lead up to Christmas, and all of those sorts of things. I think this is a really beautiful book. I am so delighted to see it longlisted here, to see that it got so much love on things like the Rathbones Folio Prize. I think it deserves so much attention, and I'm really glad to see it. Whether it will make the shortlist, who knows? A book this short can sometimes lose out in rereads because other books around it kind of can crowd it out with more happening. But I think the amount that happens in just over 100 pages in this book is really quite staggering. And I thought about this book a lot after I finished reading it, and I really hope that you've enjoyed it too. I've been Bob the Bookerer, talking about this book. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.